Emma Lawson hurried through the crisp November streets, the chill biting at her cheeks, her coat pulled tightly around her as she clutched her tote bag filled with sketches from the gallery where she had spent the entire day. Her body ached from standing on hard floors, her mind heavy with the hum of conversations and polite smiles she had forced herself to give, but she couldn't stop walking, almost as if some invisible force urged her forward. The city around her was a blur of orange streetlights reflecting on wet pavement, the sound of distant traffic mixing with the soft crunch of her boots on fallen leaves, and for a moment, she felt entirely alone in the world, exhausted in every sense, yet strangely alive. Then, without warning, she collided with someone, papers flying from her bag, a warm rush of coffee spilling across the sidewalk, and she instinctively gasped, flustered, fumbling to gather her things. "I'm so sorry," a voice said, calm and steady, and she looked up into the eyes of Jake Harper, a stranger whose presence somehow made the cold air seem warmer, whose hands were steady as he helped her collect the scattered sketches and notebooks. There was a quiet intensity in him, an energy that pulled at her chest in a way she hadn't felt in years, and she found herself suddenly aware of every detail, his dark coat slightly wrinkled, the way his hair caught the light, the depth in his eyes that seemed to see past her surface politeness. They laughed awkwardly, both embarrassed but unable to let go of the shared moment, and for a heartbeat, the city noises faded, leaving only the soft rhythm of their breaths and the unspoken curiosity between them. Emma wanted to apologize again, to tell him she was fine and move on, yet her feet refused to obey her mind, and she lingered just a second longer than necessary, feeling a strange connection she couldn't explain. Jake, equally hesitant, seemed drawn by the same unspoken force, and for a fleeting instant, it felt as though the world had contracted around the small patch of sidewalk where they stood. Neither of them had planned to meet anyone that night, neither expected to be stopped in their tracks, and yet, in that collision, there was a spark, a subtle recognition that sometimes life works in mysterious ways, pushing people together when they least expect it. As they finally parted ways, each took a step back into the evening, but neither could shake the lingering awareness of the other's presence, a quiet tension that hummed in the air long after they had turned separate corners. Emma continued walking, her sketchbooks clutched tighter, her mind replaying the encounter, noticing for the first time how her pulse had quickened, how a small smile had crept onto her lips despite the weariness in her bones. She felt as if she had stumbled into a story she didn't yet understand, a chapter that had begun with a simple collision yet carried the promise of something more, something that whispered in her chest even as her feet carried her home. Meanwhile, Jake watched her disappear into the crowd, a sense of anticipation lingering in his chest, a quiet wonder at the randomness that had brought them together, wondering if this chance meeting was truly random or something more, something neither of them could yet name. The streets were nearly empty now, frost settling on the edges of the sidewalks, and the city's hum seemed to pause, leaving only the echo of two strangers crossing paths in a moment that felt suspended in time. They should have been exhausted, both physically and emotionally, drained from the routines of their days, weighed down by invisible burdens, yet there was an energy between them, a quiet pull, as if meeting each other had given them a reason to keep moving, to keep breathing, to keep hoping. Neither noticed the small details of the night, the way the lamplight shimmered on puddles, the way leaves swirled in tiny whirlwinds along the curb, or the distant laughter of people they would never meet, but both carried a private awareness. An intimate recognition that something had shifted in the world, even if only slightly. The moment was brief, lasting only a few minutes, but it left a mark, a small echo of connection that neither could ignore, a gentle tug that would call them back to each other again, sooner or later. Emma's thoughts drifted as she walked, imagining the stranger she had just met, wondering if she would ever see him again, feeling a strange warmth in her chest despite the cold and the long day, an odd energy that made her pulse steady even as her legs ached. Jake, standing now at the corner of the street, watched the direction she had gone, his hands still slightly warm from the contact, thinking of how rare it was to meet someone who stirred curiosity and comfort simultaneously, someone whose presence could feel both electric and calming. And even though neither spoke another word that night, a silent understanding passed between them, a promise that their paths were not done crossing, that fate, or perhaps the universe, was nudging them towards something neither fully understood but both felt with sudden clarity. That night, as Emma finally reached her apartment, the sketches safely tucked away, she realized she hadn't felt the fatigue she had expected. Instead, her mind raced with thoughts of a stranger who had touched more than just her papers. He had touched a corner of her heart she didn't know was still awake. And Jake, back in his own quiet apartment, replayed the moment endlessly, the laughter, the spill, the shared glance, and a quiet hope that perhaps some encounters were meant to change the course of ordinary lives, reminding people that even when they should be exhausted, sometimes the heart keeps going, keeps searching, keeps hoping for moments like these that make the world feel just a little bit brighter. After that first collision on the frosty November streets, Emma and Jake kept running into each other, and it was never truly by accident. At first, it was small moments, Emma browsing a shelf at the old bookstore downtown and noticing him in the same aisle, his hand brushing a copy of a novel she loved, his eyes lifting in surprise as he recognized her, and for a split second, the world narrowed to just the two of them among the towering shelves. She smiled, a little shyly, and he returned it, awkward but genuine, and they exchanged a few words about books and authors, each feeling an unusual spark, the kind that makes the chest tighten and the mind race with possibilities. Then came the coffee shop mornings, the ones where both of them claimed to be just passing by, but lingered longer than necessary, sitting at adjacent tables, stealing glances, and talking about everything and nothing. Jake sharing stories of sleepless nights at the law firm, Emma speaking of her favorite painting techniques and dreams she never told anyone else. Every meeting felt electric yet familiar, as though they had known each other for far longer than a few chance encounters. Even when their days were long, when fatigue should have made them retreat into solitude, they found themselves drawn to these moments, craving the conversations, the laughter, and the quiet warmth of a presence that felt comforting and thrilling at the same time. Sometimes they met at the little ice rink downtown, Emma trying awkwardly to glide on the ice while Jake steadied her hand, laughing when she nearly fell, and neither caring about the stares of strangers around them. Their chemistry was undeniable, subtle but powerful, growing in quiet increments, almost like a fire that spread slowly and invisibly beneath the surface before bursting into visible warmth. They spoke about their fears too, carefully, slowly, testing the waters. Emma admitted that she often felt restless, that her art was a way to find herself in moments when life felt overwhelming, while Jake spoke of the loneliness of working late, of the constant pressure to perform and the quiet ache of wanting someone to truly understand him. With every confession, the invisible tension between them deepened, building a private world that existed only in shared smiles, lingering touches on a sleeve or a shoulder, and moments of eye contact that lasted longer than polite conversation demanded. It was a slow pull, almost magnetic, and both of them felt it but avoided naming it aloud, each too cautious to risk their fragile connection with words that might scare the other away. One evening, under the glow of dim streetlights, they walked side by side after another unplanned meeting, neither wanting to part, and Jake finally spoke, voice quiet but unsteady, asking if Emma ever felt like she was waiting for something she couldn't name, something bigger than herself yet intimately personal, and she admitted she did, her eyes reflecting the same longing he carried, a shared recognition of unspoken hopes and fears. That confession made the space between them almost unbearable, filled with tension that was both thrilling and frightening, a blend of desire and caution that neither could fully articulate. They continued seeing each other in small ways, each meeting stretching their patience and curiosity, a delicate dance of attraction and restraint, and yet there were moments of pure joy, Emma laughing at Jake's dry humor, Jake silently watching Emma sketch the scene outside a cafe window, both feeling the strange comfort of being fully understood without judgment. Their connection was deepening, emotional and subtle, but life still pressed against them, their jobs, their routines, and the lingering shadows of past disappointments threatened to intrude, and yet they persevered, meeting again and again as if propelled by some invisible force neither wanted to resist. They should have been exhausted, drained by their schedules and the quiet emotional work of opening up to someone new, but instead they kept going, driven by a mixture of hope, curiosity, and the undeniable pull between them, moments of vulnerability sparking a bond that felt rare and precious in a world that often moved too fast. On a particularly cold evening, Jake walked her to the edge of her street, the frost crunching underfoot, and they paused, hesitating to part ways, neither wanting to end the night. "I feel like something is changing," Jake said softly, almost a whisper, and Emma nodded, feeling it too, the shift in the air, the growing certainty that this connection was more than chance. They exchanged a small, lingering glance, and as Emma walked the final steps to her apartment, she felt her chest ache with the weight of possibilities, the thrill of something new and beautiful, a connection that made her feel alive despite exhaustion and uncertainty. Jake lingered at the corner, watching her disappear into the night, thinking about how rare it was to meet someone who made both silence and conversation feel equally meaningful, someone whose presence could be comforting and electrifying at once. And he realized he was no longer just curious, he was invested, quietly, fully, in a way that frightened and exhilarated him. Over the next few days, messages came, brief texts about small things, almost mundane, but every word carried a subtle intensity, a silent promise that their story was just beginning, a rhythm that neither of them had consciously chosen, but that felt completely natural. They kept meeting, sometimes in ordinary places, sometimes in fleeting moments that felt orchestrated by fate, their lives threading together in ways neither could fully explain, and the slow pull of intimacy, of understanding, and of attraction grew steadily, a quiet flame warming them through long days and cold nights. Emma felt a strange lightness when thinking of him, a warmth in her chest that refused to fade, even during moments when life felt overwhelming, and Jake found himself replaying their encounters, remembering the laughter, the awkward moments, and the brief touches, feeling a desire to protect and nurture this fragile bond they had begun to form. And though neither said it aloud, both sensed the unspoken truth, they were moving toward something significant, a delicate and powerful connection that demanded patience, courage, and the willingness to keep going even when it should have been easier to turn away, even when exhaustion whispered that life had more pressing matters. Each encounter, each word, each glance built a story of its own, small moments that created a tapestry of intimacy and longing, and the tension between them was both electric and tender, a promise of love not yet realized but deeply felt. They should have been drained by work, by past disappointments, by life's endless demands, but somehow, meeting each other had injected a new energy into their hearts, a drive to continue, to hope, and to explore the fragile, beautiful connection that had begun with a simple collision on a cold city street. And as the nights grew colder, the streets quieter, and the city lights flickered softly against the frost, both Emma and Jake knew that they were not just passing through each other's lives, they were being pulled, slowly but irresistibly, into a story neither wanted to end. A story that promised joy, heartbreak, and the possibility of a love that could withstand exhaustion, fear, and the weight of the world. As winter deepened, Emma and Jake's connection grew stronger, but so did the invisible weight of their own fears and past disappointments, shadows neither could fully share yet both carried with quiet vigilance. Emma often caught herself staring at Jake during their meetings, noticing the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw tightened when he thought no one was looking, and she understood, without him saying a word, that he was protecting something fragile inside himself, a vulnerability that only a rare few ever saw, and she admired it, yet worried it might one day push her away. Jake, on his part, watched Emma's hands when she sketched, the way her fingers trembled slightly when she was nervous or excited, and he realized he had never met anyone so open and so simultaneously guarded, someone whose laughter could brighten the darkest day yet whose silence carried a storm of emotions he felt privileged to witness but terrified to disturb. They spent long nights walking the quiet streets after work, coffee in hand, talking about hopes, fears, and dreams that had once seemed impossible to voice, discovering common threads in their lives, a love for the small, overlooked beauty of everyday moments, a shared restlessness that made routine unbearable, and a longing for connection that had never fully faded despite heartbreaks past. But the closer they grew, the more the world seemed to intrude. Emma had a gallery exhibit approaching, her energy stretched thin with late nights and endless preparation, and Jake faced the pressures of a high-stakes law firm that demanded perfection at all hours, leaving him little space to breathe, yet neither let those obligations keep them from seeing each other whenever possible, as though the time they shared was a lifeline neither wanted to release. Then, one rainy evening, Emma arrived at Jake's apartment, hoping for a quiet moment together, only to find him staring out the window, rain streaking down the glass, a distant look in his eyes that made her chest tighten. "I've been offered a job across the country," he said quietly, his voice carrying a weight that made Emma freeze mid-step, her mind spinning, the air suddenly thick with possibilities she hadn't considered before. She wanted to react, to speak, to tell him it didn't matter, but words failed her, replaced by a swirl of fear and longing, the thought of losing him to miles she could not follow choking her heart. Jake continued, eyes still fixed on the wet streets below. "It's an incredible opportunity, something I've dreamed about for years, but I don't know if I can leave, not now, not when I've just started to feel like I belong somewhere." And the pause that followed was heavier than the rain outside, filled with unspoken admissions of hope, desire, and fear, all entwined into a fragile thread neither wanted to break. Emma's mind raced, imagining him gone, their mornings and evenings lost to distance, yet a part of her understood the magnitude of his choice, the chance to follow ambition and responsibility, and she struggled with the conflict between wanting him to stay and knowing he might need to leave. They stood in silence, the room dimly lit by the city glow, each word unsaid ringing louder than any declaration, each glance fraught with emotion that neither dared fully voice, yet their proximity alone spoke volumes, a quiet acknowledgement that their bond had grown into something neither could easily set aside. Emma finally took a deep breath, stepping closer, her hand hovering near his arm, feeling the heat through the fabric of his coat without touching, and whispered, "Whatever you choose. I need you to know that I feel it too, whatever this is, I feel it too." And Jake turned slightly, meeting her eyes, the vulnerability there mirrored in his own gaze, a silent confession that terrified and exhilarated him all at once. They had both carried burdens, Emma's past heartbreaks, Jake's fears of failure and loneliness, but in that moment, those burdens seemed lighter, their shared presence acting as a fragile shield against the world outside, a reminder that some connections are worth fighting for, worth staying awake at night wondering if courage could match desire. The next few days were a whirlwind of emotions, text messages, stolen glances in cafes, quiet walks in the park where the snow had begun to settle, each moment carrying a sense of urgency, as if time itself was pressing against them, urging them to decide whether to step back into comfort or leap into the unknown together. Neither wanted to force the issue, yet neither could ignore the growing tension, the pull that made even mundane moments feel electric, the brush of a hand against a sleeve, the shared laughter over something trivial, the way their eyes met across crowded rooms, holding meaning that words could not capture. Emma felt herself falling into a rhythm with Jake, a cadence of heartbeats and glances, a dance of restraint and longing, yet the thought of him leaving hung over every interaction like a shadow she could not shake, making each smile bittersweet, each touch weighted with unspoken questions. Jake, too, was torn, balancing ambition and responsibility with the undeniable force of his feelings for Emma, realizing that leaving might mean sacrificing something he had never expected to find, a sense of home, of belonging, and of quiet joy in the presence of someone who understood him fully without judgment. They should have been exhausted, both physically and emotionally, drained by their demanding lives and the intense undercurrent of emotions between them, but the presence of the other seemed to fuel them instead, giving energy to conversations, walks, and fleeting touches, a reminder that connection can be as sustaining as rest. One evening, after a long day, Jake finally said, "I don't know what to do, Emma. I want to take this job, but I also don't want to lose this us," and his words hung in the air, heavy with longing and uncertainty, and Emma, feeling tears prick her eyes, reached out instinctively, gripping his hand as though anchoring both of them in that moment. Her voice trembling, "Then don't, not yet, let's figure this out together," and the honesty between them, raw and unpolished, made the room feel both smaller and infinitely vast at the same time. They spent hours talking that night, the city quiet around them, unraveling fears, sharing dreams, and acknowledging truths they had avoided, realizing that connection is never easy, never convenient, but often worth every ounce of risk, every sleepless night, every trembling heartbeat. And by the time they finally pulled back, both exhausted yet strangely lighter, they understood that they had crossed an invisible line. They were no longer merely drawn together by chance, but by choice, by intention, and by the courage to face uncertainty hand in hand. They had confronted the looming threat of separation, acknowledged the fragility of life's plans, and yet, in the quiet aftermath, felt a deep certainty that they could endure the challenges ahead, that their bond was worth protecting. And that even when life pressed hard against them, even when they should have been drained and defeated, they would keep going, fueled by a hope that was as tender as it was unshakable, a hope that whispered that love, when true, refuses to let exhaustion define it, and that some hearts, when matched, will persist no matter the obstacles, continuing toward each other with every step they take. A week had passed since Jake had revealed the job offer that could take him across the country, and Emma found herself walking the same frost-lined streets where they had first collided, her hands shoved deep into her coat pockets, her breath misting in the cold night air, her mind spinning with thoughts she couldn't untangle, her heart heavy with longing and uncertainty, wondering if she should reach for him, wait for him, or let him go to chase a dream she might never share. The city was quiet, almost eerily so, the streetlights casting long shadows over the sidewalk, the crunch of leaves underfoot the only sound breaking the stillness. And she felt the weight of every decision they had yet to make pressing on her chest as if the winter night itself demanded clarity. She replayed their conversations over and over, the whispered confessions, the quiet admissions of fear, the lingering glances filled with meaning neither dared speak aloud, and she realized that she had never felt such a combination of comfort, excitement, and anxiety all at once, that Jake had become a presence in her life so essential that imagining mornings or evenings without him seemed impossible, yet the thought of holding him back made her stomach twist with guilt. And then, across the street, she saw him, standing beneath the soft glow of the cafe lights, scarf wrapped tightly around his neck, small bouquet of wildflowers clutched nervously in one hand, the posture hesitant yet determined, a quiet signal that he had come for her, that he had fought past hesitation and fear, and that he had made a choice without needing words to announce it yet, because the sight alone spoke volumes. Her heart leapt, and she hurried toward him, boots clicking against the pavement, nerves tangled with hope, and he turned as she approached, eyes wide with relief and anticipation, a smile breaking across his face that mirrored her own, and in that instant, the chill of the evening seemed to vanish, replaced by a warmth that spread from her chest to her fingertips, filling every inch of her with the unspoken promise of what was possible. "I couldn't leave without trying one last time," he said softly, voice trembling just enough to betray the depth of his feelings, and Emma, fighting tears, stepped closer, taking the small bouquet, the flowers simple but perfect, each one a token of thoughtfulness and courage, and she realized then that all the exhaustion, all the fear, all the doubts that had weighed on them were secondary to the pull that had brought them here, that had kept them going despite life's obstacles. Jake's eyes searched hers, silently asking permission, silently hoping that the fragile bond they had nurtured could withstand this final test, and Emma, feeling her pulse quicken, whispered, "I've been waiting for this, waiting for you," and the words, though few, carried years of longing, moments of hesitation, and the quiet acknowledgement that they had both risked so much for this connection. They walked together, side by side, letting the world blur around them, their hands brushing until fingers intertwined naturally, and each step was lighter than the last, not because the streets were easier to walk, but because they carried each other, the invisible burden of fear lifted by trust, understanding, and the unspoken knowledge that they had chosen one another fully and willingly. Conversations flowed effortlessly, laughter returning as it had in the early days of their connection, yet now there was a calm undercurrent, a sense of permanence, a shared certainty that they had crossed a threshold from which there was no turning back, a threshold where hope outweighed anxiety and the heart outweighed hesitation. And even as they passed familiar corners and quiet parks, they felt the city pulse around them, the frost glittering under the lights like a witness to their reunion, as if the world itself approved of the choice they had made, as if every lonely night and every lingering glance had been leading them to this precise moment, where distance, fear, and exhaustion no longer mattered because the bond between them had become undeniable, unshakable, and beautifully alive. Emma glanced at Jake, seeing the same mixture of relief and exhilaration she felt mirrored in his eyes, and in that shared gaze, they both knew that their story would not be perfect, that life would continue to challenge them, that work, responsibilities, and uncertainty would press against them again, but that now, armed with courage and commitment, they could face whatever came, together. The city's lights reflected in puddles from an earlier rain, shimmering like tiny stars at their feet, and Emma laughed softly, a sound mingling joy and disbelief, and Jake chuckled, pulling her hand a little closer, and in that simple, human touch, The weight of weeks of fear and longing lifted, leaving only possibility, connection, and a deep, abiding warmth that neither had expected but both desperately needed. They walked until they reached the small bridge near the river, the water below reflecting the moonlight in gentle ripples, and there, standing side by side, they paused, breathing in the cold, crisp air, feeling the quiet intimacy of being together without words, feeling the emotional bond solidify in the silence, stronger than any doubts they had carried. And then, as if to punctuate the night, Jake finally said, "We'll figure it out, together. No matter what comes," and Emma, leaning against him, felt tears slide freely, the release of months of uncertainty mixing with joy, relief, and love, all in one overwhelming moment, and she nodded, trusting him completely, knowing that the journey ahead would be theirs to share, every step, every challenge, every triumph, together. They should have been exhausted, after weeks of emotional struggle, physical fatigue from life's demands, and the constant tension of unspoken questions, yet they kept going, moving forward not because it was easy, but because they had found something worth every sleepless night, every fear, every uncertainty, the rare, quiet, unstoppable force of a love that refused to yield to exhaustion, a love that promised that even in the coldest nights and the hardest moments, some hearts keep moving, keep hoping, and keep choosing each other. And as they walked back toward the softly lit streets of the city, hands clasped, hearts beating in sync, they felt the certainty of what they had discovered, that connection, when true, is worth fighting for, worth staying awake for, worth risking everything. And in that simple truth, Emma and Jake found their home not in a place, but in each other, a home that no distance, no exhaustion, no fear could ever take away, a love that had survived hesitation and doubt, and now, finally, would thrive.